The desert sun beat down on the roof of Forward Operating Facility, Echo 6, a remote military base buried deep in the Nevada sands, miles from the nearest town and even further from civilian eyes. Its perimeter was lined with reinforced fencing, motion sensors, and enough surveillance gear to rival a Pentagon substation. But the heart of the base wasn't the tech, the bunkers, or the drones humming across the skies. It was her. Captain Eliza Monroe stood at the edge of the training yard, clipboard in hand, sunglasses hiding the careful calculations behind her eyes. She watched as recruits ran drills below, sweat glistening on their brows, their boots pounding into dirt she'd memorized like scripture. She didn't speak much, and when she did, it was brief, precise, and calm. Some called her cold. Others, those who'd served with her in Afghanistan, Syria, and places not even on the map, called her something else, deadly. She wasn't tall. She didn't bark orders. Her voice never rose above a calm, deliberate tone. And still, she had a presence that could stop a colonel mid-rant or freeze a cocky private with a glance. She had scars, though most were invisible, beneath the skin, stitched into muscle memory and reflexes honed through missions no one in this facility had clearance to discuss. Most people didn't know much about her past, and those who did rarely spoke of it out loud. One rumor said she had once been captured by insurgents outside Kandahar and escaped using nothing but dental floss, 2 pressure points, and sheer willpower. Another claimed she'd served with a tier, 1 unit as an embedded intel asset, and taken out an entire ambush team in total darkness. The truth was simpler and far more unsettling. She was among the best operators the U.S. military had ever produced. And she had walked away from the battlefield, not because she had to, but because she chose to. Now, she oversaw training programs, psychological assessments, and high-security asset evaluations at Echo 6, a quiet desk job on paper. But nothing about Eliza Monroe was ever just paperwork. It was Monday when SEER Team 9 arrived. 4 men, all in their early 30s, ripped straight from the elite units, Army Rangers, Marine Raiders, Navy SEALs. The kind of operators who lived off adrenaline, protein shakes, and the unshakable belief that they were the sharpest blades in the arsenal. They swaggered off the transport like they owned the air around them, eyes scanning the base with casual indifference. Monroe observed from a distance, noting everything, how they walked, who carried what, which one was the unofficial leader. Lieutenant Adam Kessler was the loudest of the 4. Tall, broad, and loud enough to echo off hangar walls. So this is the top-secret hole in the ground? He'd joked to the airmen guiding them. Doesn't look like much. Another, Corporal Vega, muttered, "Heard the CO here's a real hard-ass." One of those desk tactical types. The others laughed. "They say she's ex-Black Ops," Sergeant Thorne added, not quite smirking. "But she's like 5'4". How dangerous can she be?" The 4th, quietest one, Davis, said nothing. He just watched. Eliza had seen this type 100 times. Good operators, no doubt, but used to measuring leadership by volume and biceps. She'd worked with their kind in theater, and had buried more than one of them after their bravado got them killed. Later that afternoon, they were officially briefed. "This is not a combat op," said Major Ellis, the base commander. "You're here to run a series of unannounced penetration tests on Echo 6 security protocols. Simulations only. No real weapons. No live fire. You will test, assess, and report. Nothing more." "Yes, sir," Kessler said, smirking. Eliza watched the exchange without comment, standing beside the major with arms folded behind her back. Her uniform was crisp. Her stance was relaxed. But her eyes said, "I've already mapped every exit you'll try to use." Later, in the officers' lounge, The seer team was still joking. "She doesn't even carry a weapon," Vega said, sipping a protein shake. "Bet I could snatch her sidearm in 5 seconds flat." Thorne laughed. "What sidearm?" "All she carries is a clipboard." "She'd probably write me a strongly worded memo," Kessler added. "That's her kill shot." They laughed. Davis didn't. 2 days later, the drill began, without warning, as designed. It was 0900 hours. Monroe was inside the command and control center, monitoring comms with a civilian technician and 2 junior officers. Everything was routine: satellite uplinks, drone route logs, base vitals. Then the lights cut out. Emergency backups flickered to life, bathing the room in red. Doors locked. Internal comms dropped. The technician turned, startled. "What the hell?" Before anyone could react, 4 men in tactical gear stormed through the side entrance, one of the few not monitored by camera feeds. Kessler was first. He shouted, "Secure the room," in a mock operational tone. Vega grabbed the technician and shoved him into the corner. Thorne and Davis flanked Monroe. Monroe didn't move. Thorne stepped forward. "Captain Monroe, please hand over your sidearm." "I wasn't informed of a live simulation," she said, voice steady. "Protocol override," Kessler replied. "This is an unscheduled infiltration drill. We're assessing your threat response under sudden conditions." She held his gaze. "There's a difference between training and intimidation, Lieutenant. Just doing our job, ma'am." She slowly unlatched her sidearm, a sleek M17 pistol, and placed it on the console. Kessler snatched it up with a grin. "We'll keep this safe." Davis said nothing. He was watching her movements closely, the way her foot shifted slightly under her stance. He saw it, that glint of calculation. "She's not rattled," he thought. "She's measuring." Thorne reached into his pouch and pulled out a plastic zip tie. "Just for realism," he said casually. "We'll release you in 5 minutes." He stepped behind her and wrapped the tie around her wrists, not roughly, but firmly. Too firm, Monroe didn't resist. She didn't speak. She just stood there, her posture slightly shifting, her breathing slow, her jaw relaxed, but her eyes had gone cold. Outside, the technician still sat in the corner, stunned. The junior officers looked frozen. They weren't sure whether to intervene or call for backup. The door was sealed. The cameras were off. And the seer team was clearly operating beyond normal drill limits. Inside, Kessler circled Monroe like a shark testing a cage. "So," he said, twirling her sidearm in his fingers. "What's the plan now, Captain?" Monroe didn't answer. He stepped closer. "Silent treatment?" She looked at him finally and said quietly, "You've made 3 mistakes." Kessler raised a brow. "Oh yeah?" 1. You think a weapon makes you dangerous. 2. You think numbers protect you. And 3? She smiled, just slightly. You zip-tied the wrong wrists. Kessler frowned. "What?" She moved. Kessler didn't even have time to process what was happening. Captain Eliza Monroe, wrists still bound in front of her, dropped into a crouch, spun inward, and slammed the edge of her left arm into his wrist. Her body flowed like water, not raw force, but sheer efficiency. The pistol he'd been casually flipping into the air clattered to the floor before he could raise it. Then came the follow-through. Her forehead snapped forward, cracking him clean across the bridge of the nose. Kessler stumbled back, blood already streaming from his nostrils. He never saw the knee that caught him in the ribs. Thorne, standing behind her, shouted, "What the hell?" as he reached for her, but Monroe was already twisting. She brought her arms under her feet in one smooth motion, snapping the zip tie tight between her knees and using her own body to split it. A painful move. The plastic cut into her wrists, drawing blood, but it did the job. Free. Vega lunged forward like a linebacker. He outweighed her by at least 60 pounds. She pivoted on her heel and sidestepped just enough to let him fly past her, then grabbed his arm and redirected his weight. He slammed shoulder first into the metal console, knocking monitors to the ground and cutting power to the center display. Davis didn't move. He stood by the wall, arms half raised, not out of fear, but recognition. He'd seen this before. Once, in a black site in Eastern Europe, he'd seen an Israeli operative dismantle 3 men in a hallway using a water bottle and a laptop charger. That same precision was in Monroe's every movement, each step calculated for outcome, not drama. He stayed still, observing, not intervening yet. On the floor, Kessler groaned and pushed himself up. His nose was crooked, his eyes watering. This isn't part of the F***ing drill. Monroe turned slowly toward him. You're right. Drills have rules. Vega tried to rise. She stomped on the inside of his knee. Not enough to break it, but enough to keep him down. He screamed in frustration. Thorne drew a combat blade from his tactical vest. That's when things shifted from simulation to something darker. Eliza's expression didn't change. No fear, no anger. Just an eerie calm, the kind that unsettled men who thought fearlessness came from muscle or noise. Thorne didn't wait for permission. He lunged. Outside the command center, the technician and junior officers stood frozen, watching the locked glass door. From their angle, they could only see silhouettes, shadows darting across red emergency lights. The technician turned to one of the lieutenants. Shouldn't we call for backup? She's handling it, the young officer replied, sounding unsure even as he said it. Those are Seer guys. She's outnumbered 4-1. No, the lieutenant murmured. She's not. Inside, Thorne swung the knife downward. A hammer fist grip, direct and brutal. Monroe caught his wrist mid-strike and twisted it up and outward, forcing his own momentum to turn against him. His balance faltered. She drove her knee into his hip joint, collapsing his stance, then struck upward with her palm. The base of his chin snapped back with a crunch. The knife fell. She didn't go for it. She didn't need it. Instead, she yanked him forward by the collar and spun, using his body to slam into Vega, who was just starting to rise again. Both men dropped. Kessler tried to crawl toward the sidearm he dropped. Eliza moved in a blur. She kicked the pistol across the room, under the technician's console, then drove her heel into his ribs again. He let out a short, broken wheeze. 3 down. 70 seconds in. Davis still hadn't moved. He stared at her. Captain Monroe stood in the center of the room, breathing slow and steady. Blood from the zip tie cuts dripped onto the floor. Her knuckles were red, but not shaking. The chaos around her, groaning bodies, flickering lights, scattered furniture, only made her stillness more terrifying. You didn't hesitate, Davis finally said. She didn't respond. Not even for a second. You knew exactly what you were going to do. I assessed the threat, she replied simply. This was a simulation. No, she said, stepping forward. This was an ambush dressed up as a joke. Davis raised his hands slowly, not in surrender, in understanding. He didn't make a move. Across the room, Kessler moaned. She's F***ing crazy? Monroe looked down at him with something like pity. No, she said, you're just sloppy. The technician behind the glass finally triggered the override on the security door. It hissed open with a hydraulic thump. Major Ellis and a team of officers rushed in, weapons holstered but hands ready. They stopped in their tracks. Stand down, Monroe said, voice calm. It's over. The major surveyed the room. 4 commandos sprawled across the floor, bruised, bleeding, and moaning. Equipment knocked over. 1 knife, 1 sidearm, 0 shots fired. Eliza standing like a statue, unarmed and unshaken. Report, Ellis barked. Monroe turned to him. Unauthorized escalation during a live training scenario. No injuries to command personnel. All hostiles neutralized. The major looked at the SEER team, now sitting or lying against walls, dazed and humiliated. He glanced at Davis. What the hell happened in here? Davis didn't look away from Monroe. She was unarmed. And she took us all down. In under 80 seconds. Ellis blinked. You're serious? 79, Monroe corrected softly. By mid-afternoon, medical teams had treated the SEER team's injuries. Kessler's broken nose, Viga's torn ligament, Thorne's fractured jaw, and a nasty shoulder sprain from Davis, the only one who hadn't engaged. None of them filed formal complaints. They couldn't, because admitting what happened would raise one unavoidable question. Why 4 elite Special Forces operators were so thoroughly dismantled by one unarmed officer, a woman they had underestimated from the moment they landed. Unofficially, the base buzzed like a beehive. Rumors flew faster than drones. She didn't even need her gun. She broke the tie on her knees. They never touched her twice. One recruit whispered, she made Kessler cry. Whether he cried or not was irrelevant. What mattered was what came next. That evening, Monroe sat alone in her office, sleeves rolled up as a medic cleaned her wrist wounds. The room was dimly lit, the air still. Shouldn't have let them tie your hands, ma'am, the medic said softly. That was the point, Monroe replied. He paused. What point? She gave him a tired smile. Let them feel in control. Control makes people reckless. She leaned back in her chair, letting the sting of antiseptic settle in. The door creaked open. Major Ellis stepped inside. Captain, sir, SEER Team 9 is grounded until further notice. Internal review is launching tomorrow. I'll be filing a full report. Understood? You want to add anything to your statement? She shook her head. The situation resolved itself. Ellis studied her a long moment. They're pissed, so am I. They thought they were testing you. They were, she said. And they failed. Outside her office, as darkness rolled in over the Nevada desert, the story was already making its rounds through nearby bases, airfields, and black site comms. They said she never raised her voice, that she disabled 4 trained killers in 79 seconds, that she wasn't just dangerous, she was a reminder, that in the shadows where true warriors operate, ego has no place. Only precision, discipline, and the calm before the storm. 3 hours after the incident, the air inside Echo 6 was still thick with disbelief. The command center had been cleaned, shattered equipment removed, blood scrubbed from the floor, the room reset as if nothing had happened. But no one could unsee it. The personnel who'd witnessed the takedown firsthand moved with a quiet reverence, as if they'd been part of something historic, something unspeakable. And in a way, they had. Whispers carried faster than reports. From the flight deck to the intel labs, they all said the same thing. Monroe had handled 4 Tier 1 commandos without a single shot. 4 against 1. No gun, no backup. And she walked away with just 2 cuts on her wrists. Rumor inflated the story, of course. Some said she broke Kessler's ribs in 5 seconds. Others claimed she flipped Viga with a single finger. But behind the exaggerations was one irrefutable fact. Eliza Monroe wasn't the dusk-bound officer anyone thought she was. And the 4 men who tried to prove otherwise now carried the shame of learning that truth the hard way. In the medical bay, Kessler lay back on his cot, a bandage across his nose and gauze stuffed in his nostrils. His pride hurt more than his ribs. "She caught me off guard," he muttered. Viga sat nearby with a knee brace and a 1,000-yard stare. "You had her weapon." "And back up. She baited us," Thorne grumbled through a wired jaw, each word a struggle. Across the room, Davis leaned against the wall, arms folded. "She didn't bait us. We escalated." Kessler scoffed. "It was just a drill." "No," Davis said. "It stopped being a drill the second you tied her hands. You knew the rules. We've done worse in simulations." "And look what it got you," Davis said flatly. The room fell quiet. None of them wanted to admit it, but Davis was right. They hadn't just tested Monroe's readiness. They tried to embarrass her, break her reputation, prove a point that backfired in the most public, humiliating way possible. Kessler stared at the ceiling. "I don't get it. She's not big, not fast-looking. She didn't even flinch. She's trained for close-quarters neutralization. Not the way we are differently." "Cleaner," Davis said. "I've seen people like her. You never see them coming until you're on the floor trying to remember how. Where the hell did she even come from?" Viga asked. "She wasn't listed under SOCOM. I checked before we landed." "She wouldn't be," Davis replied. "Not if she was Tier Aero." The others looked at him. Davis nodded slowly. "The kind of operator they don't log in the system. Intelligence-backed, Black Ops adjacent. When things go loud, we go in. When things go quiet, she does." Back in her office, Eliza Monroe sat alone in silence. No computer, no notepad, just her and the ticking clock on the wall. The adrenaline had long since burned off. What remained was the controlled emptiness that came after, not relief, not guilt. Just the cold, clear memory of every movement, every reaction, every breath taken between action and consequence. There were no regrets. She didn't attack first. They escalated. She ended it. Still, she knew what was coming. The simulation had crossed a line, and in doing so, it dragged command oversight into the shadows. There would be questions, reviews, political friction. And somewhere up the ladder, someone would want her blamed. There always was. Major Ellis stepped into her office without knocking. He didn't need to. He closed the door behind him and stood in the center of the room, arms crossed. "You all right?" he asked. "I'm fine. I don't mean physically." "I'm fine," she repeated. He exhaled and took a seat. "You know there's heat coming for this, right?" "I didn't start it." "No, but you finished it in front of half the base. That's hard to sweep under the rug. They came in with no warning, bypassed protocol, locked down the room, disarmed a commanding officer, and zip-tied my wrists. I know. I did what the training manual demands. I neutralized a hostile threat in an enclosed environment with minimal force and no casualties. You also broke a man's nose, separated another's shoulder, fractured a jaw, and ruptured Viga's knee ligament. Self-defense, she replied, and restraint. I could have done worse. Ellis looked at her carefully. That's what scares them. She raised an eyebrow. Them? He hesitated, then said, Words already made it to SOCOM. They're not happy. Because I protected myself? No, because you made their boys look like amateurs. Monroe didn't respond. Ellis leaned in. You humiliated 4 elite operators. Doesn't matter if you were right. What matters is that now every base in this quadrant is talking about how a paper officer took down 4 commandos in under 90 seconds. 79, she said quietly. Right, Ellis muttered. 79. That night, A conference call was held in a sealed, secure room beneath the main compound. Major Ellis, a liaison from SOCOM, a Pentagon observer, and Colonel Riggins, who oversaw SEER operations at a national level. Monroe wasn't invited, but they spoke about her for over an hour. Riggins was livid. She used excessive force. Ellis countered. She was disarmed and surrounded by 4 operators who broke every protocol. They locked down the room, seized her weapon, and escalated the drill. She broke bones. She prevented worse. If she wanted to kill them, they'd be dead. There was a long silence. The Pentagon observer finally spoke. "This isn't about damage control," he said. "This is about what happens when we underestimate assets operating outside conventional command structures." "She's not conventional," Riggins muttered. "Exactly." They paused the conversation, then shifted it toward containment. Public silence is imperative. No leaks. No press. What about the captain? She's to remain at Echo 6 under restricted operational capacity. No new assignments. No interviews. No documentation. Ellis grimaced. "You're benching her? We're containing her. After everything she's done? She embarrassed SEER. That's going to cost us." Ellis stood his ground. Or maybe they embarrassed themselves. The line went quiet. Meanwhile, Davis sat alone in the facility gym, wrapping his injured shoulder in athletic tape. Unlike the others, he hadn't been struck. But he felt the impact more than anyone. He'd been part of dozens of ops, black bag jobs, site extractions, real-world scenarios where everything went to hell. He'd seen hardened killers freeze under pressure. But what he saw in Monroe wasn't adrenaline. It was something scarier. Control. She'd weighed every movement, every second, as if her mind ran on a separate clock from everyone else's. She hadn't fought with rage. She fought like a chess master, 2 turns ahead of every piece on the board. And Davis respected that. Hell, he admired it. So when the others regrouped the next morning and started tossing around phrases like "lucky hit" and "she went too far," he said nothing. Let them tell themselves whatever made them feel better. But Davis knew. Monroe wasn't lucky. She was trained. The next day, Monroe stood outside the main hangar, watching a drone take off under the morning sun. Her hands were bandaged, her uniform freshly pressed. She knew containment was coming, knew she'd be sidelined, at least for a while. It wasn't personal. It was political. Optics, reputation, face-saving. She didn't care. She hadn't taken this role for recognition. She took it because too many good soldiers got themselves killed, believing strength came from volume and weapons. She trained them to survive, to read danger before it exploded. And if they weren't ready to learn that from her, they'd learn it the hard way. Like SEER Team 9 just had. Later that afternoon, as she entered the mess hall, conversations halted. Forks froze mid-her. Jokes died in throats. Even the music on someone's portable speaker clicked off. Monroe walked past without a word, plate in hand. She didn't need applause. Silence was louder. And respect finally had arrived, not through title or stripes, but through action. And it would not be forgotten. The rain started falling just after 0400 hours. A rare occurrence in the Nevada desert. Cold, steady. The kind of rain that made metal ring and sand hiss. The kind that erased footprints and blurred lines. Captain Eliza Monroe stood beneath the overhang outside the armory, eyes fixed on the gray sky as drops tapped softly against her uniform. She didn't move. She didn't flinch. Just stood there, watching, breathing, silent. She liked the rain. It washed away the noise. Behind her, Echo 6 was still pulsing with tension. The incident, that's what they were calling it now, had spread beyond rumor. It had taken on shape. Wait. Command meetings were happening every 6 hours. Reports were redacted and rewritten. Her name bounced between desks in the Pentagon, so calm, and some 3-letter agencies she'd stopped trusting years ago. Officially, the matter was under investigation. Unofficially, they were trying to figure out what the hell to do with a woman who had just broken the myth of Special Forces superiority and made them look like rookies while doing it. But Monroe wasn't thinking about politics. She was thinking about the man who came at her with the knife. Sergeant Thorne. 6'3", decorated, aggressive, reckless. She could still hear the sound of his jaw snapping from her elbow strike. She hadn't meant to break it, only disable. But once a strike is in motion, there's no room for second-guessing, just execution. It had been a clean move. But she saw the fear in his eyes just before he fell. Not fear of pain, fear of being bested. That stuck with her. Inside the base's medical ward, Thorne lay propped up in bed, jaw wired shut, bruises blotting his ribs and cheek. He stared at the wall, unmoving. Across from him, Kessler paced, agitated. She was never supposed to fight back like that, he snapped. It was a drill, a simulation. We took her weapon to see how she'd respond under pressure, not to what? Davis interrupted, walking into the room. Not to make a mockery out of her? Not to show her up in front of the whole base? Kessler turned. We were testing her. You were humiliating her. She's a commander. She should have had control of the room. She did. After she dropped all of us. Kessler flinched at the truth of it. Davis stepped closer, calm but deliberate. You didn't follow protocol. You ignored chain of command. You didn't simulate an infiltration. You turned it into a power play. She drew blood, Davis. Real injuries, real damage. She used restraint. If you can't see that, you don't belong in the same room with her. Silence. Thorne tried to speak, but the metal in his mouth made his words unintelligible. His eyes, though, were loud with shame. In the operations center, Major Ellis stared down at a stack of reports, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Monroe stood across the desk, calm as ever. They're filing formal complaints now, he said. Kessler claims excessive force. She raised an eyebrow. He says that after initiating a lockdown, disarming a superior officer, restraining her without consent, and introducing a real blade into a controlled simulation? Yes, Ellis said bitterly, because optics matter more than facts. I want to be present at the hearing. They won't allow it. Then I want my own statement included in the official file. Ellis looked up at her, eyes searching. You know this isn't about justice, right? This is damage control. They're trying to put a lid on the fire without looking at what caused the explosion. She stepped forward, placing a small USB drive on his desk. What's that? Security footage. Cameras were off. Not all of them. He blinked. You recorded the simulation? No, she said. I recorded them. Ellis stared at the drive for a long moment, then picked it up. And what's on here? Everything, she said. Start to finish. Audio included. Including the part where they joked about seeing what the captain's really made of. Ellis leaned back in his chair. For the first time since the incident, he smiled. Captain, he said, you just threw the first strike. Word of the footage spread like fire on dry grass. No one had seen it yet, but everyone knew it existed. And just like that, the narrative began to shift. Monroe wasn't just defending herself. She'd been provoked. And more than that, she had receipts. The unspoken fear across the seer hierarchy wasn't just embarrassment. It was exposure. That footage would show 4 elite operators violating their own doctrine, taunting a superior officer, and weaponizing a training simulation into personal theater, and then being eviscerated by her, calmly, efficiently, legally. It would end careers, so the calls started happening. Quiet ones, from unnamed offices, from men who never gave last names, offering her options: retirement, relocation, a job elsewhere with better pay and zero scrutiny. Each time she declined, and each time they became more nervous. That night, Monroe returned to the training yard. The rain had stopped, but the air was thick with silence. She stood alone, staring at the mock breach house used for CQB drills. Lights buzzed faintly inside. The door creaked in the wind. She took a step forward, then another, and stopped. Someone was watching her. She turned her head, slow, measured, and spotted him. Davis, leaning against the perimeter wall, arms crossed, eyes steady. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. He nodded. "Heard you uploaded the footage. Ellis has it. You're going to burn them." "No," she said. They lit the match. "I'm just handing over the fuel." He stepped closer. "Why not walk away? You could leave. Take one of their offers. Disappear with a clean file and a medal they'll never put in the news." She looked at him, long and hard. "I don't fight for ego," she said. "And I don't walk away from accountability, theirs or mine." Davis exhaled. "They'll come after you. They already did." "No, I mean after." She gave him a small smile. "Then let them." By the end of the week, everything had changed. The footage was verified. The chain of events re-documented. A new report was circulated quietly through command channels. The official summary was short. Captain Monroe acted within acceptable defensive parameters under duress after unauthorized escalation by visiting SEER operators. No punishments were made public. But 3 members of SEER Team 9 were reassigned to separate posts. And Kessler? He was discharged quietly, with a medical waiver. The final note in his file: compromised judgment under stress. Davis stayed. He requested transfer to Echo 6. When asked why, he simply said, "I want to learn something new." Monroe was back in her office when the final message arrived. A plain envelope. No markings. No name. Inside, a single sheet of paper. Typed. No header. No signature. Just one line. "Some wars are fought in silence. You just won one." She folded the note and placed it in her drawer. She wouldn't frame it, wouldn't quote it. But she understood it, and she knew more battles would come. Because silence, as always, was never empty. It was loaded. And she was ready. The hum of the city lights seeped through the thick blackout curtains of Monroe's quarters. Outside, Las Vegas glittered like a swarm of fireflies, indifferent to the tempest brewing inside Echo 6's walls. Captain Eliza Monroe sat rigid on the edge of her narrow bed, the faint glow of her tablet casting sharp lines on her face. The message from the unmarked envelope had echoed in her mind for days. Some wars are fought in silence. You just won one. But what she won was only a small battle. The war? That was just beginning. Her phone buzzed, an encrypted call. She didn't hesitate. "Monroe." Ellis's voice was low and tired. "You're going to want to hear this." "What is it?" "Pentagon's getting involved. Direct oversight. They want to sit down tomorrow. They're sending a team." Monroe nodded, her mind already calculating. "I expected as much. They want you there. Alone. No backup?" "Officially, no. Unofficially, they'll have eyes everywhere." She exhaled, the weight settling. "I'll be ready." Morning came cold and gray. The briefing room at Echo 6 was sparsely furnished. A table, chairs, and a bank of screens blinking silently in standby. Monroe entered to find Colonel Riggins waiting, flanked by 2 men in suits whose eyes carried a mix of suspicion and curiosity. "Captain Monroe," Riggins said, voice smooth but sharp as a scalpel. You've made quite an impression. She returned the gaze evenly. I prefer results to impressions, Colonel. Riggins smiled thinly. Results have consequences, Captain. Not all of them favorable. He gestured to the men in suits. This is Agent Harlan and Mr. Pierce. They're here to assess your actions and determine your future with Seer. Monroe settled into her chair, steeling herself. We reviewed the footage, Harlan said. Your response was effective. But you stepped outside the chain of command. Under duress, Monroe replied. Pierce interjected. You understand the risks? By going public with the footage, you've escalated tensions within the agency. The men involved are pushing back. I don't regret it. Harlan leaned forward. They say you undermined morale. I say they escalated beyond protocol. Riggins cut in, voice dropping. We need to know if you're an asset or a liability. Monroe met his gaze without flinching. I'm both, depending on the mission. The room was silent, the unspoken verdict hanging like a guillotine. Later that day, Monroe retreated to the training yard. She needed the space, the familiar. Crunch of gravel beneath her boots, the empty targets waiting silently. Davis joined her without a word, handing over a bottle of water. They're circling, he said, watching her. I know. We're not just talking about internal politics anymore. What do you mean? Davis glanced around, lowering his voice. There are whispers. Outside groups, contractors, even some politicians. Monroe's brow furrowed. You're saying this is bigger? He nodded. Your takedown rattled some cages filled with power and money. She took a long drink, letting the cool water steady her nerves. I'm not afraid, Davis smiled. Good, you shouldn't be. That evening, Monroe's secure line blinked again. It was a new contact, an anonymous number. Captain Monroe, a disguised voice greeted. If you want to survive this, you'll listen carefully. Monroe leaned closer to the receiver. There's more at stake than you realize. The Commandos you faced, part of something larger, a private contractor syndicate embedded in our own ranks. She blinked. Explain. They're not just soldiers for hire. They're here to control information flow, suppress dissent, and protect certain interests that threaten national security. Monroe's heart raced. Why tell me this? Because you've become a liability to them, and they're planning to take you out. The line went dead. Monroe stared at the receiver, mind racing. She wasn't just fighting for her name anymore. She was fighting a hidden war, a war within her own government. The next morning, a convoy arrived at Eco 6's gates, armored vehicles, tactical teams. Ellis met her at the entrance. They want to move you to a secure location for your safety. She shook her head. I don't run. He hesitated, then nodded. Understood, but be careful. Monroe entered the base, feeling the weight of unseen eyes watching her every step. Weeks passed. Investigations deepened. The media caught wind of the story, though official statements remained tightly controlled. Monroe continued training, preparing for whatever came next. Davis stayed by her side, their partnership forged in fire and steel. Together, they would uncover the shadows lurking behind the badge and face the coming storm head-on. The night was thick with heat, a dry desert blanket settling over Echo 6 like a warning. Captain Eliza Monroe paced her quarters, mind racing, senses taut. She'd received the anonymous tip days ago, but its implications refused to settle. Syndicates embedded inside their own ranks. Private contractors masquerading as loyal soldiers. A shadow war spilling into the daylight. Her every move felt watched. Her every word, a potential weapon turned against her. She flicked on her tablet and began digging through encrypted files, intelligence reports, personnel rosters, deployment logs. There it was. The evidence. A pattern of unexplained transfers. Off-the-books missions. Shadow contracts hidden under layers of bureaucracy. One name kept appearing. The man who'd once overseen the Seer Special Operations Unit before Riggins, Commander Garrett Vale. Monroe frowned. Vale had vanished months ago under suspicious circumstances. No official explanation. No farewell. Just silence. Monroe tapped her secure line. Davis, meet me in the conference room in 10 minutes. Urgent. Within moments, Davis arrived, already scanning her anxious expression. What's up? I found something. She pulled up the files. See this? Command transfers cloaked as routine reassignment. Look at the dates. Right after Vale disappeared. Davis frowned. Ghost ops. Exactly. Vale wasn't just sidelined. He was erased. Davis leaned in. Why? Because he knew too much. Monroe tapped a folder labeled Project Phantom. This is where the contractors come in. Davis shook his head. Phantom? That was supposed to be decommissioned years ago. But it wasn't, Monroe said. It was reactivated under Vale's command. A black site for off-the-books ops using mercenaries inside government ranks. They weaponized contractors against their own. She nodded grimly. And now, they want to silence anyone who knows. The door slid open. Major Ellis entered, eyes sharp as ever. Captain, I heard you're digging into Phantom. I am. Be careful. Why? Because the people who approved it still have clearance? Ellis sighed. Because the deeper you go, the more dangerous it gets. Monroe stood, meeting his gaze. I'm already in the deep. Ellis hesitated, then handed her a small card. Call this number only if you need extraction. She pocketed it. Thanks. Over the next days, Monroe and Davis moved like shadows. They traced connections, cross-referenced logs, and interviewed reluctant sources. Each discovery tightened the noose. Contractors embedded at Echo 6. Orders to suppress leaks. Attempts to buy silence. A chilling plan to eliminate threats permanently. One night, as Monroe left the armory, she noticed a figure lurking in the shadows. She paused. The figure stepped forward. A woman in black tactical gear. Captain Monroe, the woman said, voice low. I'm Agent Klein. I work off the books. Monroe studied her carefully. Why are you here? To warn you. You're stirring a hornet's nest. Monroe raised an eyebrow. And, Klein smiled faintly, if you want to survive, you need allies. And you've just found one. The days blurred into a whirlwind of secrets and dangers. Monroe's phone buzzed constantly with new intel. Threats disguised as warnings. Offers disguised as ultimatums. But through it all, she held steady. Because she knew the fight was no longer just hers. It was a war for the truth. One evening, Monroe and Davis gathered in the operations room, reviewing the latest data. Look at this, Davis said, pointing to a live feed. Across the city, a convoy of unmarked vehicles moved through deserted streets. Who are they? Contractors, Monroe said. On a mission. Target unknown. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered. Captain, a voice whispered. They're coming for you. The line went dead. Monroe's heart pounded. She looked at Davis. We need to act. Now. The convoy rolled through the night like a ghost fleet. No insignias. No headlights. Just hulking shadows cutting across the Nevada backroads. Inside Echo 6, alarms were silent. Cameras looped on repeat. The base looked normal on the surface, but Captain Eliza Monroe could feel the air shift. It wasn't intuition. It was training. Davis, she said, voice low but steady. They're moving now. Davis, posted by the window of the dimmed operations room, peered through his night vision scope. 3 trucks, armored, 10 to 12 men minimum. They're not here to talk. Monroe nodded. They're here to erase. For days, she'd been waiting for this moment. The quiet threats, the dead phones, the anonymous voice telling her she'd become a liability. It all pointed to one inevitable endgame. Now it was here. She moved swiftly, pulling open a steel case hidden beneath the operations desk. Inside, not weapons, but data, drives, dossiers, evidence of everything she and Davis had uncovered about Phantom and the embedded contractors. You take this, she said, handing the small case to Davis. Get it to Ellis. I'm not leaving you here. You don't have a choice. I do. Actually, Davis snapped the case shut and slung it over his shoulder. We do this together or not at all. Monroe stared at him. A small flicker of something, respect, maybe gratitude, flashed across her eyes. Then we move fast. Outside, the convoy slowed at the perimeter. Men poured out, masked and silent. They weren't Seer regulars. Their gear was too clean, their weapons too advanced. Contractors. Monroe's earpiece crackled. Ellis's voice came through. I see them on outer cams. 30 seconds to breach. I've called in backup, but you're on your own until they arrive. Copy, Monroe said. She clicked off the line. She reached for the old training harness mounted on the wall. Not standard gear, but hers, custom. A gift from an operator she'd once saved in Kabul. Its weight steadied her. Davis, she said. Positions. They split, moving like water through the narrow corridors of Echo 6, setting up choke points, sealing off non-essential access routes. This wasn't a drill. It wasn't revenge. This was survival. The first breach came at the east door. A shaped charge blew the frame inward. Contractors surged through, rifles raised. Monroe was waiting. She dropped low behind a steel console, sweeping a flashbang from her vest. She lobbed it across the corridor. It detonated with a white-hot bloom of light. Shouts echoed. She moved, fast, precise. One man went down with a joint lock takedown. She stripped his rifle, flipped it in her grip, and used it as a club rather than fire a shot. Another tried to flank her. She rolled under his barrel and slammed an elbow into his solar plexus. They weren't expecting resistance, not like this. Down the hall, Davis engaged his own pursuers. He wasn't as polished as Monroe, but his instincts were sharp. He fired controlled bursts, forcing them back, then sealed a secondary blast door behind him. 2 down, he called over the coms. 3 down, Monroe replied. But more were coming. By the time the contractors realized their assault was faltering, they had already lost a third of their team. Monroe seized the moment. She triggered an emergency lockdown from a panel embedded in the wall, dropping steel shutters between corridors, trapping them, dividing them, and buying time. Davis, she said, breath steady despite the chaos, get to the comms room. Upload the files to the secure satellite. He hesitated. What about you? I'll hold them. That's suicide. No, that's the job. He wanted to argue, but saw the look in her eyes. Cold steel, unblinking. He ran. Monroe moved again, deeper into the labyrinth of Echo 6, her mind a map of choke points and kill zones. She didn't fire. Not once. Every strike, every movement was designed to incapacitate, not kill. She was sending a message. I don't need your weapons to stop you. Minutes passed like hours. At last, she reached the central training room, the same room where Seer Teen 9 had once humiliated her. Full circle. The contractors stormed in. 4 of them. They didn't laugh this time. They didn't taunt her. They just advanced. Monroe stepped forward, unarmed. "You don't have to do this," she said. One of them hesitated. Another raised his rifle. "Orders are orders," he said. She moved. Fast. The first strike was a heel kick to the rifle barrel, snapping it up and out of his hands. A pivot, a sweep, and she sent him crashing into the wall. Second man lunged. She grabbed his arm, twisted, and used his own momentum to throw him to the floor. Third swung a baton. She ducked under it, rose behind him, and locked a chokehold until he went limp. The fourth paused, eyes flicking to his fallen comrades. He lowered his weapon. Monroe stared at him. "Go," she said. He did. In the comms room, Davis slammed the final keystroke. The files uploaded, encrypted, and streamed to an off-site secure node. Evidence no one could bury now. He turned just as Monroe entered, blood on her knuckles, but not a scratch on her face. "You good?" he asked. She nodded. "Let's get out of here." Outside, Ellis's reinforcements arrived, real SEER operatives this time. Contractors scattered, some captured, some disappearing into the night. Ellis stormed up to Monroe. "You okay?" She handed him the now empty case. "It's done. Everything's out." He looked at her, a flicker of awe crossing his stern features. "You just blew a hole in the deepest shadow program we've ever had." Monroe shook her head. "No, I just opened the door. What happens next isn't up to me. I'm mourning." The story had already started to leak. Not in the press, not yet, but in the quiet channels where operators talk and reputations are forged. Phantom, contractors, embedded black ops, and the woman who'd exposed them. The inquiry began the next day. A windowless room. A table. Monroe on one side. A half-dozen officials on the other. Riggins was there. So was Harlan. So was a new face, a general she didn't recognize, but whose eyes carried the weight of someone used to making disappearances happen. "Captain Monroe," the general said, "we've read the reports. We've seen the footage. We've verified your claims." She said nothing. "You've done a great service to this country," he continued. "But you've also destabilized an ongoing operation. We need to know where your loyalties lie." "My loyalty," Monroe said calmly, "is to the oath I swore, not to hidden wars waged in the dark." Silence. Then, unexpectedly, the general smiled. "Well said." He closed the file in front of him. "You're cleared of all charges. Effective immediately." Riggins stiffened. "Sir," the general cut him off with a glance. "You're also reassigned," he told Monroe. "A new post, classified. You'll be briefed at 0600 tomorrow." She raised an eyebrow. "And if I refuse?" "Then you walk. No charges. No medal. No record. Just gone." She thought for a moment. "I'll walk," she said. The general's smile vanished. "You're sure?" "I'm done fighting wars in silence." She stood and left the room. Outside, Davis was waiting. "Well?" he asked. "I'm free." He grinned. "Free to do what?" She looked out across the base, where dawn was breaking over the desert. "Whatever comes next." Inside the inquiry room, the officials sat in uneasy silence. "She's a liability," Harlan muttered. "She's a legend," the general replied. "And legends can't be controlled." That night, Monroe packed her few belongings. No medals, no photos. Just a single folded note in her breast pocket. "Some wars are fought in silence. You just won one." As she walked out of Echo 6 for the last time, she felt no triumph, only clarity. The war behind the war wasn't over, but her part in it was. For now. The morning sun rose over the sprawling Nevada desert, casting long shadows across the deserted parking lot Outside Echo 6, Captain Eliza Monroe's silhouette stood still, framed by the towering gates she had passed through countless times. This time, however, she wasn't stepping in. She was walking away. Her duffel bag was light, containing only the essentials. No medals, no fanfare, no headlines. Just the cold, quiet truth she had fought so hard to reveal. Behind her, the echoes of Phantom and the contractors were already fading from the official narrative. The government's response was swift and silent. Internal inquiries, quiet reassignments, classified cover-ups. The press remained largely unaware, the story buried beneath layers of national security and ongoing investigations. But for Monroe, the war had ended, at least the war within. The desert wind rustled her jacket as she made her way to the small diner on the edge of town. It was the kind of place where nobody asked questions and everyone had a story. She slid into a booth by the window, ordered black coffee, and watched the world move around her. She was a ghost now, a soldier without an army. Weeks later, the world outside her secluded existence began to stir. In Washington, the files Monroe had risked everything to upload sparked a chain reaction. Senators whispered in corridors. Agencies scrambled to cover tracks. The contractors' network was dismantled piece by piece, but the damage was done. More importantly, the truth was out. Back in the diner, Monroe listened to the radio as the anchor reported on a whistleblower leaking classified documents exposing illegal, government-sanctioned operations. The words were vague, but the implication was clear. A name was never mentioned, but those who knew would never forget. One evening, as she sipped her coffee, a familiar face slid into the booth opposite her. "Davis, figured you'd find me eventually," Monroe said without surprise. He smiled tiredly. "I couldn't stay away." "Good, because I'm thinking the fight isn't over." He nodded. "It never is." They talked for hours about what had been, what was, and what might come next. The network of corruption they uncovered was deep and far-reaching. Phantom was just one node in a sprawling web of covert operations. "They'll try again," Monroe said. "But this time we're ready." Davis looked at her, eyes reflecting the same fire she'd seen months ago. "Then let's make sure they don't get the chance." Monroe's phone buzzed, a secure message. It was a simple command, mission ready. She smiled. Not all wars were fought with guns and bullets. Some were fought in the shadows. Months passed. Monroe and Davis operated in the shadows, building a network of trusted allies, former operatives, journalists, hackers, and whistleblowers. Together, they worked to expose corruption and prevent another Phantom from rising. Their efforts became a silent storm, subtle yet unstoppable. In time, Monroe's legend grew, not in the public eye, but in the halls of covert operations. She was the woman who had taken down 4 commandos in 79 seconds. The soldier who had exposed a government within a government. Her name became a symbol, a warning and a beacon. One night, as she walked alone beneath the neon glow of a distant city, Monroe felt a presence behind her. A voice familiar and calm. "You did good, Captain." She turned to see Ellis, now a civilian, but no less formidable. "I'm not done yet," she said. He nodded. "Neither am I." Together, they disappeared into the night. The fight continued. Legacy. Some wars are fought in silence. Some are fought in shadows. Eliza Monroe had won her battle, but her war, and the war for truth, was just beginning.